Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you guys so much for attending today, the part two webinar on automation and AI to solve business problems in medical communication. It's just about 1 o'clock Eastern now, so we'll give folks another few minutes, a minute or two, just to come on in. While we are waiting for folks to enter, just a quick reminder that if you missed part one at all, we do have the recording for that. So we're going to do a brief part one recap, but we'll also pop the link for that on our YouTube page into the chat. So look out for that, and you can watch it or go back and rewatch any of your favorite parts. So just keep an eye out for that shortly. We'll go ahead and get started in just a minute here. And it's shaping up to be a little bit of an overcast day in Boston today, which is where I am and where our headquarters is located. But I also hear that some other folks have some rain coming their way. Alex, I think you said down in Florida
Yeah,
you have it too.
yeah. I'm hoping my power holds up for the hour.
Yeah.
So
Well,
if I
if Alex
randomly
disappears, we'll
leave,
know why.
yeah,
But it shouldn't be so bad here in Boston. I think we'll be okay. All right, so we're a couple minutes past. I think we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll be recording this session as well. So if there's anything you want to go back and watch, we'll make that link available as well. So I'm Jeanette Towles. I'm the founder and CEO of Synterex. I've been a medical writer for about, I think, 20 years now. Every time I think about that, the number goes up. And so I've kind of sat in a number of different roles that touch regulatory and clinical. So I kind of bring that perspective with me. And at one point, I had a small group of programmers reporting to me and kind of working on automations when that concept was sort of a new thing, maybe about a decade ago. Um, and just as a little icebreaker here, I'm going to have our co-hosts and speakers tell us about a time when they tried to use AI and it didn't work out as planned. And before I throw it over to my co-host Pushpa, I'm gonna give you my answer to this one. So we were working on a poster for an upcoming conference and wanted to maybe play around with using AI for images and to create something unique for that presentation. And we put in a couple of prompts, and honestly, what we got back was so silly. It was like a robot that had this really like cute face on it that it just evolved into just a really good laugh about what this thing had actually produced. So a little counterproductive, but we got a good laugh over it. So Pushpa, I'll turn it over to you.
It's all about hallucination. That's what, some of these AI tools they themselves talk about, and that we hit on almost like a daily basis. So we all have our favorite AI tools at this point, and then I personally find it ChatGPT still has a lot more hallucination to like deal with, especially 4.0, and then I find it 3 is actually better when it comes to hallucination. And Gemini has become my personal favorite in the last couple of weeks, and that has less hallucination. Again, that's something that I deal with on a daily basis.
Nice, that's a good one. And we're joined today by our guest speaker, Alex, who also joined us for part one. He's our IT manager here at Synterex. Alex, how about you? What's your AI gone wrong story?
So mine's less haha funny at the start and more funny like a month later after it happened. But it was I asked ChatGPT to help me with a command to wipe one of my test devices that I was practicing on and working on some automations for. And ChatGPT put the ID for my actual working device, so I wiped my personal computer in testing. So less haha funny at the time, probably more haha funny right now. So
Yeah, that's what I would call
um,
funny boohoo.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it just
Wasn't
goes to show you it can happen to
happiest.
the best of us, and
It's
to pay attention when you
unfortunately
learn them.
yes. Yeah. Yep. So
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for sharing those anecdotes. It helps lighten the subject for today. So We'll do a quick part one recap here as promised. We'll dive in, and in case anybody missed part one or would like to go back and check out some of their favorite parts in depth, we're going to put the link to the part one recording in the chat. So we'll be dropping that into the chat in a second. But just to recap, we kind of talked in general about the temperature in the room regarding AI, and basically it ranging from optimism to nervousness about the implications of AI and its use. We also talked about the regulatory and policymaking setting to outline the risk portion of what I call the risk value balance that makes up the value proposition for AI.
Yeah, so I think I covered AI acceptance in the technology, especially like, with the IT teams, whether they are ready to accept it and then how they're adopting. That's something that I covered in the last session. And then also very specifically the guidelines that are coming from FDA and others. It's not only to just use AI and then how to make sure that all the regulatory compliance is included while you're using AI, make sure the AI tools are aware of it, or you have to include that outside of that. And also one more thing that I covered was how to expand your skill set as a medical writer to include promotional communications, including social media being one of the high volume content that's getting created on a daily basis. So these are the three main things that I covered in the last meeting.
And then I mainly focused on best practices around the development of AI. Gave some insight on how data is leveraged within AI and how to keep it secure. Then talked about different AI models and how they're trained. Then lastly, moved into NIST and talked about risk management, bias and fairness, AI security, and policy. And these talking points are, what shapes public opinions and helps build trust in the consumers of AI.
Absolutely. Last but not least, we talked about the 11 by 11 tipping point as a study of kind of when the use of AI starts becoming meaningful in the life of a worker using it. We also discussed some strategies for figuring out when and how to implement AI and automation to make sure that you actually see that return on investment. So from there, we'll start with a quick poll before we really dig into the content. So we want to know, what is the overall sentiment within your organization about AI adoption? So you should see that poll appear in the chat, and you should be able to select your answers from there. The possible answers are very positive, neutral, somewhat negative, or very negative. And just make your selection and click submit, and then we will get a result. And I'll let you know what those results are. They're still coming in. All right, so it looks like we have most of our answers in, a couple more flowing in. And not unexpectedly for the responders so far, we're kind of seeing a range of responses. It's actually encouraging to see that a lot of organizations are feeling very positive about AI adoption. 80% of our responders, with another 10% being somewhat positive. And as we talked about in part one, there's another 10% that's somewhat negative. So I think you guys are all in the right place to talk more about AI and how we can get people comfortable with these concepts to ensure comfortable and successful adoption of AI in your organization. So from there, we're actually going to take a deep dive and we're going to look at some practical applications and case studies of AI. I'm going to go ahead and get us started here with one of my case studies. I'm calling this Business Information Library and Responses. So an application that we had to fill out. And I saw the questions that the application asked and kind of immediately sighed because I knew I'd answered most of these no fewer than 20 times in some manner or another. Then I figured I might actually be able to take those responses and use them as a library of sorts to fill out most of what I needed in this new application. Mind you, before I did this, I made sure that none of the answers were going to be things that I didn't already discuss publicly or that I don't want to actually say about Synterex. And so you can kind of see the prompts that I put together here. I attached the document or documents that I wanted to pull from. That's a feature of relatively newer versions of ChatGPT, I think from 4 onward through their minor versions that they're on now. So I asked it, using the attached file, answer the following questions, and sort of numbered them out in the same way I have to actually answer them in the application. So everything from what type of market research do we do to any instances where you had to, change our products or services, to exports and challenges with international customers. So really quite a range of topics. I have personally noticed in using this type of prompt that Word documents tend to go a little bit better in uploading this as a source. But it does actually usually read PDF if it's not a scan, so you can get pretty good results with that as well. And here are the answers I got by doing this activity. And you can see it kind of structured it really in the same way that I asked it. Um, this not only saved me time, but actually gave me a structured presentation that was conducive to answering this set of questions in this applications in terms of those specific questions that were asked. Some things I definitely went back and tweaked a little bit from the answer. Just as an example, right now it's written, as shown in the screenshot as a third person, they mention the use of whatever. I went back and modified that to first person plural, I believe, to me, we did this, we did that, to kind of make it sound a little more authentic, like we're really owning the response. You could simply ask the AI to do that as well. If it was a more lengthy response, that would definitely be a good use of an additional prompt there. But because this was short, I kind of went back and did it myself. I didn't really have to change too much. But another thing I like too is this caveat that it gave me at the end that um, this is really only encompassing the sources that it was given. So it's a nice reminder of, hey, I'm working within your limitations there that you've defined for me, and for the user to really be thoughtful about the limitations it's given the system to work within. So that was a good reminder. So that prompted me to make sure that I really did answer all of the questions in my new application and make sure I got everything. And in doing that, I actually realized that I forgot an aspect of it, but that I did have an additional source that would cover that topic. I'd already written up for another purpose. So I always like to say, if you've written it and perfected that at that time, why spend time doing that again? And possibly make it sound like bad or worse in the process of reinventing the wheel. So I added an additional prompt after that original response in the same chat, asking it to update, and provided that additional source as an attachment. So you can see that that prompt here. I asked it to add a paragraph from this particular source about our supplier diversity program. So, again, really engineering that prompt to say, I want you to do this and target it toward this question using this piece of information. So I think a nice use case and good results. And here's what I got back from that second part. And it's hard to say with the result that I got that I could say it better myself, because I did say it myself and I just recaptured it in a way that saved me hours of rethinking the same issues of our value proposition, our ethos, and other important topics to our identity as a business. And so before we move into our next use case, I'm going to pause for another quick poll. This will appear in the chat again. And we want to know, how prepared are you or your organization to explain your use of AI to clients or stakeholders? And so the possible responses are very prepared, somewhat prepared, neutral, somewhat unprepared, or very unprepared. So go ahead and make your selections and click submit there, and we'll tabulate those results. And then I'll let you know where everybody landed. And we'll give folks another minute or so to get their responses in here. Everything's looking good so far.
Now, this is going to be a very interesting one to see the results.
I'm super
I know
excited for
that
this
every
one.
company is at a different stage and phase at this point.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting.
Interesting. So, oh, the results are still changing. I'll give that another second for people to enter their responses. Yeah, I think prepared is the operative word too. It's like I think people may be a stage before that where it's like, how do I know if I'm prepared? So it might be a tough question, but about 38% of you indicated that you're somewhat prepared. So that's great. You're one step ahead there. 13% said you're very prepared. So kudos to you all. Um, and 50% said somewhat unprepared. So that's interesting. Again, I think you're in a great place to see what we can do to help you get a little bit more prepared for those conversations with your stakeholders. And it's actually a really great question in general. Um, how can you be prepared to kind of go have these conversations and explain AI to your stakeholders and clients? So from the regulatory writing perspective, I always like to think of regulatory documents as being prepared in with the goal of meeting business goals. That's really what it's all about. You're there at the end of the day to help the business achieve some regulatory action, and then the document is your vehicle for doing that. Um, Sometimes the value proposition of doing that, even just manually, let alone with AI, is a little bit murky. So, one of the things that was done in industry in this section of medical communications recently was the American Medical Writers Association actually did a whole series on the value of medical writing, and they went to various stakeholders and did a survey about what they found useful about what medical writers bring to the table. And they have all of those materials up on their website. It's a fantastic read. But my takeaway from that was that the regulators were actually the ones that chimed in and said when there are medical writers involved, the quality of what they're getting in terms of understanding the business strategy behind the document is substantially better. So I think, possibly there's the need to kind of do the roadshow a little bit and reiterate the value of what you're bringing to the table in general, and then frame the AI piece in terms of if you can have tools that help you focus on what you do best, or in other words, the value proposition of what you do within medical communications, why not do that? Alex, what's your take on this question? How can we help explain to stakeholders?
Yeah, so in my point of view, we gotta ensure that we're adhering to things like NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's basically what develops the standardizations for AI development, and I talked more about this in part one, if you want to check out the slide on NIST. But really bringing home with stakeholders security, accuracy, and reliability. These are going to be the main things to hit home about. And then once you have all of those prepped, think about ethics and how you might answer, like, is your AI abiding to your company's values and ethical standards, things like that. So there's a couple things to think about when you're, proposing AI.
Interesting. So it's almost like you kind of need to do some teaching as part of the implementation
For sure.
process.
For sure.
And Pushpa, what's this like in your world? I know you have some kind of more detailed information here, but give us a little more detail here.
Yeah, get this is a use case, right? So how we write prompts. So we write prompts as in this one is we also build this inside tools on top of like the AI that's available. So we integrate with OpenAI, ChatGPT 4, and yet like someone that actually like gives input. So now GPT itself like takes more inputs in terms of like files, but at the end of the day they still don't have a way to read the landing pages, and then the full context. Providing full context is basically the goal here, right? So what you're seeing here is I'm a brand manager creating a Facebook post for our company's corporate page. So there is something called a role. And then when we see that in the API side, then we'll know even further down as in like how GPT actually works. So they need to know what's the goal. So GPT or any other AI tool needs to know what the goal is and who am I, and then what am I trying to achieve. That is very, very critical, and that's called a role. And that needs to be set first before you ask any questions. So set that up in very upfront, and then also then give as much details as possible, because this is not sometimes like, it's not like just to sometimes you do want to ideate and brainstorm session with your AI tool. But when it comes to actually getting those very specific results, make sure that you give all the guardrails to it. So for example, here I'm just saying like, it's awareness about REM sleep deprivation and then how its side effects are. Okay, so that is broad enough topic. But again, limiting that to 400 characters, and then that's where going back to my hallucination thing, right? So give it very specific things about 400 characters, and then include hashtags or do not include hashtags. So you see that I'm creating a social media post, but I'm giving all these guardrails that how I want this to be created, and only then you see the results that you're seeing down below here. Otherwise, it is going to be like a page, and then also it is not concise. It does not understand the context. So one more thing we do is, again, like, I just like what Jeanette showed, either upload a file or give a landing page. If there is no way for your AI tool to access the internet, literally copy paste what's in the landing page that you're trying to promote. So promotional content, or you already have any other context, just copy paste the entire thing. It is completely capable of like reading and parsing that data and understanding. So it could be as simple as that.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that idea of kind of defining roles up front. And I think that plays in really strongly too with, some of the concepts that Alex was talking about in terms of defining, how are we looking at what the tool is doing, and also who has to participate in that activity, and what role do they play in that?
Mm. So there are other examples, right? So yeah, you're absolutely right. So we set that upfront so that, like, again, other examples are clinical study reports. So these days, people do study reports using, again, like, AI, or publications, or even like, scientific paper translations. So translations is a pretty very, very, like, it used to be very heavy work with the translations, but now AI has made it very, very simple. And then of course, it's a lot more accurate than you think when it comes to translation. So translation, the context is pretty set. So it is just a word-to-word translation to another language. So it actually does a pretty good job of that too. So I want to show another next slide here is an approach to, like, what is in, like, how do we, what type of content we can actually build on AI. So last on part one, we did talk about, like, we don't want to give too much data to the AI, which is open AI. That means they actually use the data to train their models, and then this is going to be public data, but this data itself may not be available to people publicly, but at the same time, the data would be utilized for training. So there are some authors of books, probably you guys know already. So this was in the news that they are claiming that their books were used in ChatGPT modeling. So that means that, you can tell from like the sentences that it creates, and then the, like, formation of some of these information, all these things were used. So that's why giving your own very specific data, especially when you're writing medical information, giving the brand names out, and then giving, like, the side effects and all these things are, if you're using OpenAI, please really, really make sure that you are using something that is trusted and that is not used for modeling. So what we're seeing here is, like, importance of disease awareness. So just the disease awareness itself is important in many, many ways, right? So you can build communities out of it, and then this is sometimes, like, helps clinical hiring for actually, like, recruiting for clinical trials. And that has become a very hard one these days. And then because, like, again, there are so many, first of all, there is less awareness. And then also there's stigma around vaccines and things like that, that people are not participating in clinical trials as much as it used to be, even, like, 5 years ago after COVID, there was a huge shift in that. So disease awareness is a great way to like talk about any promotional content. So if you're bringing anything that is just the disease awareness, and then everybody would be open enough to talk about it, instead of talking about the actual brands and then the pharma companies and the names of those things and who is actually prescribing, all these things becomes very heavy. So if we move to the next one, I have an example of this is social media post example. This is from a pretty well-known pharma company. What many of them are doing, this is an example on the internet that you can go find it, is you can find it on most of the pharma companies, medical device companies, and even clinical trial companies. They are all doing something like an awareness program. So you see that it's the disease awareness, and then also potential ways to, of course, to deal with it, either with the drugs or kind of how to prevent it. So this is where people are more open to learning and then also building this community. So this is a great way to build your content through AI, but yet we're not giving away any of our brand related content.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's great too, because it's kind of talking about the issues, but also giving patients information and ways to access information. So I really do like this use case, and I personally hope we see more content like this as time goes on.
Yeah.
All
Ready to
right.
go. Nice.
So we have our next exciting poll here. Where do you see the biggest potential for AI in your business? And we'll see that come up in the chat momentarily. And the possible answers are clinical assessment, quality assurance or compliance, data entry, patient education and communication, or other. And if you select other, feel free to put some answers in the chat, and we'll get a little discussion going on that. So go ahead and select your answer and submit. And I would add to, when we say your business, this is applicable if you're in a department in a wider business, or if you own your own business. I think there's definitely a place for it in either setting. And it looks like our responses are still coming in. Looking good so far. And this is an interesting one. I'll give it another second. I know you guys are waiting with bated breath to see what the answers were.
I mean, I would choose multiple things here actually, but it's hard to choose one, right?
It is, yeah. And I've probably seen use cases for all of them and more. But it's interesting. So 50% of responders answered that data entry is the biggest potential. So that's an interesting one. I have not delved as much into the data management or data entry side of things with AI. So maybe during Q&A we can get some dialogue going on that one. Um, and then 33% said patient education and communication, which is awesome. Totally agree. That's a great use case, especially for generative AI. And then 17% said quality assurance or compliance, which is, I think definitely another area that's ripe for the picking. When you also combine it with kind of the human in the loop concept, where we're keeping humans involved to kind of, still oversee that quality aspect. Um, is there any place you would add room for clinical assessment, Pushpa? We didn't get any responses on that one, so that one's sticking out.
Yeah, clinical assessment is a hard one. Again, I think for this, it needs a lot more context. Probably that's why it is harder to solve, right? So that's what I would
Yeah.
imagine. It needs a lot more context. I mean, for example, data entry probably is something that everybody wants to outsource to some AI all the time. And then we saw automation, and then now in AI.
Mhm.
Even like quality assurance, I think is a hard one for AI to solve as well. So
Yeah.
compliance is something that we've been seeing, and then there are a couple of products that are out there who are already starting to look at what the compliance checks are on AI.
Mhm.
But it is quality assurance is hard.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree that it probably needs more for quality and clinical. It probably needs more rules, more training, more of a time investment. You might see the return on investment in that later down the road. So it's interesting. And I'm gonna check the chat real quick just to see if we got any dialogue here. And it looks like we're gonna save the dialogue for the Q&A section. All right, so from there, we're going to move into the topic of automation because, after all, this webinar is entitled Automation and AI. So, Alex, do you want to walk us through a little bit of how do you know when to choose one or the other?
Yeah. So, when should you automate? It's the big question with AI and just scripting in general. It's on the IT side. It's something I deal with weekly. So, and it might seem obvious to some, but not many know how advanced systems can be now and how talented engineers can easily take your company to the next level with automations. Let alone now the speed it takes to learn certain things using AI with ChatGPT and whatnot, or Copilot. Just learning scripts. Also, assuming you don't wipe your computer like me, it usually works out really well, and it can, take you to the next level for sure. So, start off, you got to think about repetitive tasks, right? Like the data entry slide is a good example. I have countless scripts that do data entry on different platforms already, so I can take a Excel file and just put all that data in like SharePoint, for instance, or whatnot, and or Salesforce, better example, and retain all that data without having to go manually import all of it. So and then even a lot of non-technical people, for instance, might have done an Excel script, for instance, to, automate a spreadsheet that they work on. So, and is the task something that takes more time than it's worth to you or your company? You can also consider human error. Just think about how many times you've mistyped something and then click send and then realized you messed up. Personally, I'm becoming famous for saying thank instead of thanks in my email signature, just because I'm not paying attention when I'm writing my signature after I worked really hard on writing this nice email, and then I put thank. So it's another one. And so when Synterex was getting its footing and I was the first person to join the IT department, I was told, think about if we hired 100 people tomorrow, and how would you build automations to handle that workload? Think about if you have contractors that work over the weekends and IT is off duty, for instance. You can have automations to help while you're gone. And this kind of seems almost like a must. So, and then a cool option that you can leverage AI is importing AI into your ticketing service, potentially giving a generated response to a user's problem. So if someone writes a ticket like, how do I do this? AI can get to them first and give them a response, while your IT department, can actually solve the problem or figures out how to solve the problem. We we want to do this. It currently is very expensive. A lot of the AI now is mostly used on consumption based. So, say every call to the AI costs a dollar, for instance. So it can add up really quickly. And so, and then you prioritize automations based on impact to productivity and just the general ROI for the task itself. For instance, if it takes me 5 days to build an automation that is only going to go off a couple times this year, probably doesn't make a lot of sense to make the automation. So I'm going to now pass it off to Jeanette and to get some automation examples.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really good breakdown of kind of, how do you think about one or the other? I'm going to give you a case where I actually thought about both. So that's possible too. Maybe you don't have to choose. But thinking through at the end of the day, like how much time are you going to save doing this versus doing something manually is going to be good in any case. So a former employee of mine actually taught me about using macros for the first time, again, maybe about a decade ago for uses like the one we're going to talk about now. So I definitely will give him all the credit for that one. He was sort of pioneering at the time and taught me kindly, even though I was his boss and probably didn't know what he was talking about at the time. Like Visual Basic, what's that? So I was thinking the other day about an accounting task that we actually do regularly, and it occurred to me that it sort of followed the same logic as this employee was using at the time in terms of things that we're doing manually that's taking time and therefore taking away from time I could spend on something that's billable and better for my company. Um, but that thing actually follows a very specific process that should be both repeatable and explainable. For example, if I wanted to explain it to an intern or an employee to do. And we're working a lot in Excel for this type of task. So I figured at the end of the day that Visual Basic might be the best way to go if I was going to try to automate this task that was, giving me pains at the end of the day. Um, so the thing I will say about this particular type of prompt writing is that it's extremely specific and precise. I honestly had to write this like 3 or 4 times to get it to be precise enough to combine the items in a way I wanted it to be done to match the manual process that we were doing at the time. So you can see I asked it, can you write me VBA code for Excel that will summarize this way, then that way, then this, et cetera, et cetera. And so what I wanted at the end of the day was I had an output that was, pages and rows of data and to actually concatenate like items without having to do it manually. And therefore would make it easier to summarize. So, after a couple of tries, and I would try once and it kind of wouldn't concatenate things the way I wanted it to. So I kept refining the prompt a little bit. I eventually got it. And then what I like about doing this for Visual Basic is that ChatGPT is actually really great at explaining the bit of programming logic it's following to actually fulfill your request. And then it gives you the Visual Basic code that you can copy and put right in your developer tab, which you see on the right side of the screen here. And there's a little copy thing where you can just click on it. Um, Again, it kind of goes through the instructions for how you actually put it in as well. So say you're not as familiar with using your developer tab for uses like this, it's pretty much telling you exactly how to do it in Excel, which is nice. Um, it also tends to tell you anything you might have to take a look at in your other settings. For example, it tells me you might have to modify certain settings for macros to be enabled. That's a pretty typical one for medical writers. You just want to be careful how you modify those. Talk to your IT department if you're not sure about that one. I would say too that the developer tab itself, once you take the code and paste it in, is actually great at debugging if something isn't running correctly and kind of telling you what it thinks you might need to do to fix it. So we're kind of stacking up the odds of success here for anybody who like wants to try this out and might have a use case for it. And then here's how that process actually resulted. So you can see, there's still a little bit of cleanup to be done once they're all concatenated in terms of reducing redundancy. And you could probably write some additional code around that. But again, each one of these phrases separated by the semicolon was actually a completely separate row, a new data point previously. So clicking through all of those and copy pasting was going to take up to hours. So why not make it easier and less prone to error while we're at it? Here's another example. You can see a lot of details to pull together. Doing it this way, however, also takes that potentially sensitive data. So we have client project names, we have study names, things like that, that can't go into something like OpenAI. That would be somewhat confidential information that we wouldn't want to put out there in case sponsor hasn't started their study yet or it's material information. So it takes it out of an environment like that that's going out to the internet and it's putting it in your Microsoft Office environment, which is, as secure as you make your Microsoft Office environment. So I kind of like that aspect of using a use case like this, and you could still leverage it, to have the power of AI to take advantage of automations. You could even take this one step further and combine this type of automation and logic into a closed instance of AI and further teach it the rules of how you want to summarize it if that return on investment would make sense at the end of the day. So that's it for this particular use case. Alex has another one that is a little bit more complex than this, but I think still shows the magnitude of potential time savings on something that's sort of administrative in nature, but actually a highly necessary task from the standpoint of compliance and making sure that client data stays secure. And in the process of doing that, I think he actually made it a better user experience as well. So Alex, I'll turn it over to you for your automation example.
Thanks, Jeanette. So, all right. So I'm going to start with, if you're not familiar with data siloing, this is when you give users access to only what they need and only certain users have the power to approve access. The automation I'm going to show you is how to give users SharePoint access with manager approval without IT involvement. In the previous setup, managing access control was a significant time investment, involving multiple manual steps that could extend the time required to grant access from hours to potentially days. Initially, when a user needed access to a SharePoint site, they would send a request via messaging to the administrator, who would then have to reach out to the user's manager for approval. Once approval was obtained, the administrator would manually add the user to the SharePoint site. Recognizing the inefficiency of this process, the implementation of an automated system was proposed and executed. This new system utilized an IT ticketing service where users select the client from a drop-down menu and provide a justification for access. The request triggers an automated approval workflow to the user's manager, which is an email that gives all the information of the ticket, and then they hit approve or deny. And upon approval, a backend script automatically assigns the user to the SharePoint site, significantly reducing the time and manual effort previously required, reducing operational costs by a lot. So where this is not AI, the job could easily be replaced by AI and uses a similar workflow to AI. Non-generative AI uses conditions similar to how we program this automation. For example, if condition, do this, otherwise you do this. Non-generative isn't programmed already knowing these conditions in the flow. The AI would make predictions based on what it knows from the data you already fed it and creates those conditions in training. So this is one of the few examples of automation that we've implemented here at Synterex. We have probably close to 20 or 30 things that do similar things. So
Awesome. Yeah, and I think this was a perfect case to go back to what we were talking about in part one, where we took out our Eisenhower matrix of, what we spend our time on and looked at this relatively administrative task and how many people are involved on it. We're like, wow, a lot of time is being spent here. So again, if you find use cases like that you think could be good for automation and you're spending time on it, it's worth talking with your stakeholders and your trusted partners to see, is this something that could be automated? And next, let's talk a little bit about Copilot. I think we've covered some other different types of tools. I think this is another one that's going to become more prominent as time goes on. So Alex, I know you've kind of played around with this a little bit. What's your take on Copilot?
yeah, so I mean, especially for a lot of people in the call and the writing space and just people that use Office products in general, Copilot is widely integrated with all the Office products, and I'll talk more about that in a second. So, Microsoft is investing billions of dollars a month in the development and progress in AI. And I know for Microsoft, billion doesn't really seem a lot, but this far outweighs anything else they're working on right now, and at least at least cost at throwing money at it. So their product is called Copilot, as Jeanette mentioned. So now, personally, I am a bit biased to ChatGPT. I think the AI responses are a bit better, but historically, Microsoft will probably win the race and whose AI product is better. Um, if you're a Microsoft shop, meaning you use the Office products, then Office 365 Copilot could be utilized. Think of a time when you were making a slideshow and you just didn't know what to write or what picture to put in or how to organize bullet points. Well, Copilot can do this and even edit the PowerPoint itself for you. The tool can also be used in Word, Excel, Outlook. One of the other cool features is you can ask it questions based on documents that you have access to in your SharePoint site or OneDrive. For example, you could ask based on an SOP that you wrote. In my experience, like we have IT SharePoint site with hundreds of SOPs on how to solve certain problems, whatnot. For instance, I could ask it to tell me how to deploy an app to a user, and it'll reference that SOP, link it, and then respond based on what we had put in that operating procedure. Um, so, and then also one of the caveats with Copilot as well is it's not a one license gets all. There are types of Copilots, for instances, Office 365, which I talked about, and then there's GitHub, which is for coding specifically. Copilot is also rather expensive compared to ChatGPT. For instance, if you're purchasing enterprise, um, so if to weigh that out, you have to think about how how you want it to integrate with your internal systems. Like if you find that use case with PowerPoint or even with Word or whatnot very useful, and that expense can save you a lot of hours, then it's probably worth it. Um, Whereas ChatGPT, you type it into a console and you have to copy paste whatnot. So um, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see where Copilot goes. I think it's a great product. I think it just needs to quite literally learn a little bit more, and I think it'll be great. And also, they might need to lower the cost a bit. It is extremely expensive. So
Yeah, I think it's interesting from the small business perspective. Um, I have heard a lot of chatter about that being sort of almost an employee perk, to kind of draw in people to a company to work there. It's like, oh, we're gonna, integrate things like Copilot that are gonna help increase your quality of life and save you time. Pushpa, have you seen that at all in the marketing world? And what are your thoughts on that as a small business owner?
Yeah, so Copilot, our team actually uses it for coding and documentation, product documentation, and then these things are like super, super easy, right? So it's a fun thing that happened like 2 weeks ago. I just like asked in one of our engineering calls, like, hey, we're paying for Copilot for everybody. Are you really using it, or can we just take those things away? So it was a unanimously saying like, yes, we're using it and don't take it away from us. It's like, okay, so that
Mm.
was like I said, all right, let's just keep it. So that is the reality. I think it is adding a lot of efficiency to documentation. Now, from our perspective, being a tech vendor, and then also just like coding itself, right? So a lot of these things sometimes what the engineers call the grunt work, right? So grunt work is something that they got to do. It is not very creative all the time, so the grunt work can be kind of like outsourced to Copilot.
Mm. Interesting. And it sounds like, so you mentioned a couple tools earlier. It sounds like you're using multiple tools. I know I am personally. I have my favorites for kind of specific tasks. Do you find that you're kind of using each each tool for a specific purpose?
So that is that we're kind of like I mean this is the era of we're all drowning ourselves in like in tools, right? But there is a reason for it too, right?
Mm.
So sometimes we start with a very broad use case and then kind of like narrow it down to our own use cases, and then one tool cannot have everything, and then that's when we get very detailed. So say for example, even like social media management, where we participate in that whole sector, there are very generic tools, and those generic tools are not able to like serve the market individual industries anymore, right? So that's why we built it specifically for pharma. And then now it's like, okay, you understand the problem, and then because there are nuances for every role, every industry, every sector, every size of the company, and then we do need tools, otherwise it's not going to be efficient. So there are some tools that can be like, helpful for only companies that have over 10,000 people. And then, but that is not going to scale down to our size of the companies. So tools, I mean, again, like, just testing that out, and then making sure that we're using the tool on a continuous basis so that we can keep our costs also, like, even like large companies, they have the same thing, right? We start using the tool, and then we'd never go back and see what's the efficiency of that on a quarterly basis, and then reevaluate, and then kind of like, revisit our just tool set itself, which itself is kind of like, a problem for the IT teams, I guess, to go after everybody to see what's the usage of it. But to your point about like, tools, we do need to definitely test it out and then use multiple tools. And then that is for efficiency for sure. I vote for that.
Interesting. Yeah, I know there's often a lot of discussion on, chat boards for professional organizations and stuff like that too about, hey, have you tried it for this? Or I noticed it's not working. I tried to do what you said you did with it. And a lot of the time it goes back to what Alex was saying before about licensing and knowing for the thing that you bought actually what it gets you access to as well, I think is an important consideration in that evaluation.
Yeah. Sometimes I think like the tools based on the roles of people also differ a lot. So Jeanette, what do you do? How do you manage that? I mean, which role should get what tools? Do you kind of like, bifurcate at the department level, role level? What do you do?
Yeah, I think, any discussion of that has to be paired with what level of training are those folks prepared to undergo? Because I think, if I think about how our tool works, it has different layers of decisions the product has to make, and the person who's administering it really needs to understand that decision tree and the implications of entering something or changing something in that knowledge base. So they would really need to go rather extensive training to be able to operate it in that way. I think at the user level, there's probably fewer things like that to navigate, but that's an important consideration from a quality standpoint too. Is these people have to undergo that training? It has to be documented, and then you still have to have the human in the loop, so to speak. So they all have to be prepared to sort of wear different hats that, to date, I think medical communicators really haven't received the training to be able to kind of take off and put on all of those hats all, within 10 minutes of each other. So it's a lot of moving pieces, and I think it will require at the industry levels sitting down and thinking about what are the implications here? How are we going to train people to think this way in the future?
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So I think that's a good segue here into our final poll. So we want to know, now that we've talked about some of these topics, how soon do you plan to implement or update automated business processes in your company? And so the possible responses are already did, within 1 month, within 6 months, within 12 months, in more than 12 months, or unsure. And again, feel free, if you select unsure, to provide some commentary for us to consider during our Q&A, which is coming up shortly. But go ahead and select your answer and click submit, and we'll get those tallied up. But from my standpoint with this, everybody already should be planning. If you haven't started planning it, you're behind the curve. Come talk to me and I'll help you catch up. But, I think it's something that, in medical communications, certainly this is already here. So I think getting comfortable with it and knowing your way around it is going to be the way to go for sure. Would you agree, Pushpa?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So do you see, Jeanette, like just out of curiosity, medical transcript, is that kind of like, how are they using AI? Is that a big part for them?
Yeah, honestly, I think they really kind of were pioneers, in terms of usage in our space in the life sciences. And there's a lot of really great solutions that have been out there for some time now and that have gone through stakeholder feedback. And it's another case where there's both kind of an automated option and a more AI driven option. And they both have pros and cons and ways of thinking about which one would be better based on what the goals of the translation are. So, they've really kind of gotten that down pat. I think the other thing that they were ahead of the game on was sort of the concept of memory training and how does AI actually remember what it did well. That's
Mm,
definitely something that's super relevant in the regulatory writing use case because you don't want to get a different result each time. So I think we're able to kind of do a lot of learning from what folks did in that space. And I think it's a really exciting space to use it. It certainly doesn't negate the need for really professional, talented translators, but it does help them focus on what they do best.
mm, mm, totally.
So it looks like 71% of you have already implemented. So great job. I think what I would say is feel free to share your experiences with the community and medical communications on what went right, what didn't go right, and what you would do differently. About 14% are planning to implement it within 6 months, which is also great. So um, you'll kind of hear a lot of timely topics here today, hopefully. And 14% are unsure. That's okay. Again, feel free to come talk to us after, and if there's any questions that you might have, and also you could pop them in the Q&A in a few minutes. All right, so before we end today, just a quick recap of what we covered today. We talked a little bit about automation as a means to optimization, and that can be optimization of medical writing, documents, or processes, or just other business things that you have to handle in life. Take a look at what you spend your time doing and see where your time would be best spent trying to implement either automation or AI. Innovating to differentiate yourself or your business, I think, is critical, whether you're in house or you own a business. At the end of the day, we're only as good as the last content that we produced. So we're constantly out there trying to prove ourselves and differentiate. So know what your value proposition is and how you can enhance that. Whether you're explaining that to clients or stakeholders, or whether you're a department trying to position yourself within a wider organization. Know when a simple procedure change is more valuable than an automation or AI investment. I think that's a really important point. The juice has to be worth the squeeze at the end of the day. And also, just knowing when automation would actually be a better route than AI. Generative AI is not the end all be all solution. There are other really great solutions out there that might help accomplish the same thing. So getting to know how to think through, which one would be better is definitely going to help you in your business. And last but not least, definitely get to know, your stakeholders, including your IT people. Alex is a very close friend of mine at this point because I throw out all sorts of crazy ideas. Hey, can we automate this? And I'm sure I drive him crazy sometimes, but you have to have that type of relationship to, really work with your stakeholders to understand what's possible. And at that point, we will open it up to the Q&A. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of exciting discussion there. Maybe while we're waiting for the questions to flow in, I'll put one out to the panel. So I'm curious to know, just in your day-to-day, I'll start with Alex. What are some common applications of AI in business and things that you kind of use on the day-to-day?
I think in general for business, the most the most simple and most customer facing are chatbots, AI chatbots. And you all know them. What when you go to a site looking for help and they won't let you open a ticket or call a support line until you go to battle with this chatbot. When it pops up on your screen, it's like, hey, you have to go through us first before we'll actually help you. And it's been a long time. Um, it's been on most of the larger sites for a long time, and some of them are smart, some of them are kind of dumb. So, and then another item would be like analytics. For one, is another big one. For you CEOs and whatnot. I could imagine it's really nice to see, the progression of your business and, predictions based on data that, historical data or data that you just gave it. You could see sales trends, things like that. So.
Awesome. And then Pushpa, what are the ones that you've seen that are business related?
Yeah, before that question, so I do see the info email. Is that where anybody can contact you? Is there any other person that we can contact? Especially when you're talking about like automation and offering your help. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah,
Is that
absolutely. So
right?
that's a great way to reach out to any of us, and we'll connect you
Okay.
with Pushpa as well. And you can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter as well. And if you check out the part one link, that brings you to our YouTube page as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. So for business, like kind of I mentioned it throughout the conversation today, is one is for product documentation, that we use that a lot, product documentation, because that keeps changing on almost like a weekly basis now, right? So we keep producing like new releases. It used to be like releases once a couple of months in the past, and then I've lived that life, and I am kind of like dating myself here, I guess. But now it's like every week we have releases. We are a product company, we are a software company, so we have releases. So that needs to be documented and then also communicated to the customer. So that is the highest priority for us. That's one of the reasons. And then also for like our own marketing and communications. So we definitely use that. And then so we have our own tool that creates social media posts, the AI tool. But beyond that, we also use it for writing white papers or any other communication material. So that is of higher interest. And of course, like even in coding too. So these are the areas that I continuously see ROI. Right, it has been showing results for the past at least more than 6 to 8 months. We've been continuously using, continuously seeing results, and
Mm.
just efficiencies as well.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an important point is, I think a lot of communicators are going to be focused on, what can I do in my document? And I think that's, definitely you have to think about that because that's the obvious case. But I think the less obvious ones are things you might actually find are the ones that you're spending your time on that are necessary business related functions that, to run a department or to run a business, you kind of have to spend your time on.
No,
Yeah.
no.
And Pushpa, I completely understand the coding side with like comments and like not a lot of people know, what, coders have to do with like every single piece of code you write, you have to comment and say what exactly that does. And I can imagine Copilot or whatever you're using is definitely helping a lot with that.
I think it's matching with my team and asking to like keep the license on.
Yeah, I bet.
Don't
I
go
bet.
with.
Um,
Definitely.
Another question, Jeanette. So how do you measure the success of AI projects? Like, how do you actually measure that?
Yeah, I love that question because I've gotten the question a lot, like how can we explain the return on investment to our stakeholders? And we were asked as medical communicators to do this before AI, right? Like justify your existence essentially. And it's always amusing to me because like no other function gets that type of prompt, right? So I'm like, okay, fine. I'm a data person. I'll explain my data to you so that you can see why I'm here. Keeping really detailed metrics is key. And so this involves a lot of discipline, like way more than you might think at first. So if you have a timeline that shifts, you have to use the baseline function of your project management software so that you understand at the end of the day, not just like what did this take you at the final snapshot, but overall with any shifts and any changes because of things that were within or outside of your control, what was the overall time for this? And then once you have your metrics, you can start looking at, okay, well, the first time I applied AI in this use case, it changed it this way. And the second time it changed it this way. And don't be surprised if the first or the second time, maybe even the third time, there's a 0% delta on that. That's not surprising. But by the time you get to subsequent use cases, you really should start seeing the investment pay off by that point, because with what you've done to kind of refine your way of approaching it, refine your teaching, your model, all of this time spent, that should really kind of make it repeatable at the end of the day and start, paying dividends. And then you want to track that too, and then compare A to B on a slide presentation or something like that, where, one page or something you can easily hand to a stakeholder or a client and say, yes, this is an example. This is a snapshot of a particular pilot case, but here's what I think it can do. And then, that's sort of the small piece of the pie. So if you're able to chip away at one process or one document, you sort of have to build the vision for what could you do in the macro sense. So if I repeat this process over 20 different documents or over a year, what does that look like? So sort of micro to macro. And usually when you start seeing that you can chip away days, weeks, that's when your stakeholders' ears kind of start ringing, because all of those days matter in our space. Those are days that things aren't going out to patients. Those are days where trials are continuing and millions of dollars are being spent, or your product's not getting to market. So there's a cost associated with that time savings at the end of the day at that macro level.
It completely makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to do a check here in the Q&A and see if we have any other questions. It looks like we don't have anything else at the time. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap for today. Again, feel free to reach out to any of us to discuss further and get the links to rewatch either of the sessions. We hope this was helpful content. And if there's anything else you'd like to see us tackle in a future webinar, feel free to send us that request as well. And we appreciate everybody joining today and your mutual enthusiasm for AI. Hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Jeanette.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.